Jonathan was puzzled. Infertility? Who needs the medication? I'm sorry, but as a doctor, I can't disclose any information about my patients. Helga replied. I understand. I'll take a look when we get back to New York. He then went down to the beach to look for Nancy, but she had already returned to their bungalow and was busy writing down a list of names for their children. She looked up from her list when she heard him enter the room. This is such a pleasant surprise. I've always wanted boys, but I'm happy we're going to have a girl in the mix too. Finding the right names for the triplets was a big project, and she spent the rest of the afternoon on her list. Jonathan watched her with fascination, thinking she looked adorable, biting the tip of her pencil and furrowing her brows in concentration. The rest of the group arrived the following day. Esther and Sydney had chosen Hannah, Nancy, Ashley, and Rose to be the bridesmaids. And on the groom's side were Steve, Jonathan, Jack, and Latham. Dorian had invited himself when Nancy had told him there was going to be a double wedding. Katie and Jacob were the only ones who couldn't make it because of school and work. That evening, the bridesmaid tried on their dresses in Esther's suite, drank champagne, and chatted excitedly about the wedding. Later, Hannah walked down to the beach before returning to her hotel room. She watched the sun cast its last rays of light onto the calm sea. The waves quietly lapped the shore, ebbing and rising in harmony with her emotions. She removed her clogs and dipped her toes into the water. The sand tickled her feet. She looked around, but no one else was there. Deciding to take advantage of the silence and the sunset, she sat down on a dry spot in the sand and took her tablet out of her bag. Brock had been working day and night ever since he had left the hospital after the stabbing incident. When Ashley had told him about the wedding in Aruba and that Hannah would be there, he had immediately bought a plane ticket. He put on some fresh clothes in his hotel room and then went to knock on Hannah's door. He waited for a few minutes and left to look for her when he realized she wasn't there. He walked down to the beach just as the sun was dipping below the horizon. The sky was a magnificent pink and purple, and he felt a wave of calmness wash over him as he walked barefoot in the sand. He saw a beautiful woman sitting on the beach further up with a tablet in her hand. She was facing the sea and looked beautiful in the twilight glow. He slowed down, not wanting to disturb her, but she was too busy to notice him. He stopped a few feet away from her and suddenly realized the woman was Hannah. She was bent over her tablet. A gentle sea breeze blew wisps of her hair across her face. He wanted to go up to her and brush the strands of hair away, but he was afraid of startling her, so he sat down on the sand and watched her quietly. The evening sun finally disappeared, and Hannah looked up, surprised by the sudden darkness. She stared into the distance, listening to the waves and breathing in the salty seawater air. She finally put her tablet back in her bag, stretched her legs, and stood up. Behind her, Brock also got up. She was about to walk back to her room when she sensed somebody nearby. She turned around and saw him staring at her. "Hello, Han," he said softly. "What are you doing here?" Her tone was cold and distant. He took a deep breath and smiled at her. "I came with Ashley and the others. We arrived a few hours ago. Didn't my sister tell you I was going to be here? I was looking for you, but you weren't in your room. I didn't want to disturb you just now." "You look a lot better than the last time I saw you in the hospital. How were you feeling?" He shrugged. "I'm fine. My wound is healing." "That's good. Well, I'm going to my room now. See you later." "I'll walk with you." They walked along the beach in silence. Brock looked at the small footprints she left in the sand and smiled. They arrived in front of her door a few minutes later. Hannah took the room key out of her bag and turned to him. "Good night." "Good night. Sleep tight." She pushed open the door and went in. Suddenly, she heard him cry out in pain. He had caught his hand in the door. She quickly opened it, shocked. "Brock, what happened? What was your hand doing there?" "I wanted to tell you something, but the door slammed shut." He raised his hand. "I think I cut it. Do you have a Band-Aid?" She walked over to her bed and rummaged through her suitcase. "I think I brought some. He closed the door behind him and followed her. Found it. Let me see your hand, she said. It's just a scratch, but it hurts like hell. He lied, holding out his hand and watching her intently. Let me clean it first. She took out some cotton balls and disinfectant and carefully cleaned the cut before putting a Band-Aid on it. Her hands were soft and moved gently as if she were afraid of hurting him. Brock's heart melted. He stared into her eyes and whispered, Han. She met his gaze and pulled away. There, it's done. He made no move to leave and just looked at her with a pleading expression in the room's soft light. Why didn't you visit me in the hospital after that day? Brock asked. I was waiting for you. Hannah lowered her eyes. I had a lot of work. He placed his hand on her shoulders, trying to read her face. I don't buy that. Did something happen? She stiffened and looked up at him. No. Okay, well, at least we're here now. Listen, Brock, I'm really tired from the long trip today. I need to get some sleep. Did you try on your bridesmaid dress? She nodded. What a pity it's not our wedding tomorrow. What are you talking about? She snapped. Please, just go. Can't we spend a bit of time together tonight? I'm leaving straight after the wedding. He grabbed her hand before she could protest and led her to the terrace. They sat on a lounge couch and stared at the bright stars in the sky. Brock took his phone out, found his favorite music app, and chose a soft jazz piece to create a romantic atmosphere. Hannah felt awkward and was about to get up, but he wrapped his arm around her, squeezing her tightly. She could feel him breathing on her as he pressed her against his chest. She tensed up, and her heart started racing. Han, just relax. Let's have a nice, quiet evening together. She looked up and saw that his eyes were closed. He leaned his head against the back of the lounge couch. I haven't felt this good in a long time, he declared. Why do you work so much all the time? I have no choice. It's the price I have to pay for my freedom. She had no idea what he was talking about, but decided to let it go. They fell silent as they listened to the soft music drifting through the night air. Brock cleared his throat after a while. I should be getting that project in 9 months tops. What project? But he didn't reply and just looked deep into her eyes. The next moment, he lowered his head and kissed her on the lips. Much to his surprise, she didn't pull away, so he kissed her even harder. He wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her close. Hannah gasped for breath and wanted to break free, but his grip was powerful. She slid into the lounge couch, and soon he was on top of her. Hannah knew she wouldn't be able to escape. They had gone too far, and no matter how much she protested or resisted, Brock wouldn't let her go. He kissed her tenderly and rubbed his legs against hers. She could feel grains of sand tickling her. The music was still playing. Everything around her was spinning like she was drunk. She felt weak and helpless. She closed her eyes and listened to the sound of waves crashing against the shore. Above them, the moon hid behind a cloud, enveloping them in darkness. This is it, she thought. There's no turning back now. It was soon over. Brock repeated her name over and over again and looked tenderly into her eyes. She could feel his heart pounding against his chest. She choked back tears as she stared back at him, not knowing what to say. Come on, let's go inside, he whispered. This couch is uncomfortable. He picked her up and carried her into the room. Hannah's head was spinning. What happens now? Is he going to think we're in a relationship again? She had felt something for him the day he had been stabbed, but after she had found out she couldn't have kids, there was only emptiness inside her. What will he do when he finds out I can't give him a child? She wondered. We have no future together. Brock was oblivious to her mood and assumed she was just tired. He carried her over to the bed and put her down. She pulled the covers over her and lay there staring at him with a sorrowful expression. You look so adorable, he said, lifting the covers and climbing into bed with her. Don't be shy. Let me hold you for a while. She remained still as he gently brushed the hair away from her face and touched her cheeks. His eyes were full of love. Han, I'm so happy right now. She didn't respond. He tightened his arms around her and pressed his forehead against hers. After I deal with the situation I'm in, we can get married again. How about we continue where we left off earlier? No. What's the matter? Don't you want to? I'm tired. Please don't force me. He looked deep into her eyes. Han, I would never force you to do anything you don't want to do. I'm sorry if I'm a bit excited, but it's been such a long time. You can't imagine how happy I am. He lifted her chin and kissed her on the lips. She was irresistible, and he couldn't help himself. He pushed the covers away and pulled her on top of him. She fell asleep soon after. Brock sighed with contentment and closed his eyes as he cuddled her. Hannah was woken up by the alarm on her phone the next morning. She opened her eyes and was momentarily surprised to find Brock snoring next to her with his arms wrapped around her chest. Hannah couldn't believe she had spent the night with Brock. He also woke up to the sound of the alarm and yawned. He smiled when he saw her lying next to him. Good morning, Han. She suddenly wished the ground would open up and swallow her. She lay there, gazing at his strong arms and muscular chest, and turned red with embarrassment when she recalled what they had done the night before. My beautiful bridesmaid, Brock whispered. It's a good thing I didn't give you any hickeys last night. What would people think? She tried to stretch her arms and legs, but he was on top of her before she could do anything. She gasped and stared at him in wide-eyed astonishment. He gave her a peck on the cheek. Don't worry, I'll be on my way soon. I know you need to get ready. Just let me take a quick shower. He got up and went to the bathroom. Still stunned, Hannah quickly got up, threw on a robe, and checked her reflection in the mirror to make sure there were no traces of lovemaking on her body. Brock returned a few minutes later, stark naked, and got dressed. She turned her back to avoid looking at him. Okay, Han, I'll see you later, he said, closing the door behind him. She sat on the bed, dazed. A few minutes later, Esther called to ask her to go over and help her with her makeup. Hannah quickly got dressed and left. The groomsmen were getting ready in one of the rooms. Dorian was especially excited to be part of the group and couldn't wait for the party after the wedding ceremony. He was pleased Esther and Xavier had agreed to let him go to Aruba to celebrate their nuptials. He looked around eagerly to see who he could talk to. Jack was busy helping Xavier, and Steve was silent and morose. He tried to make small talk with Latham, but it was no use. What's going on with him? He wondered. He's usually so lively and animated. He decided to see what Oliver was up to next door. Though they hadn't interacted much in the past, he figured they could exchange stories about Cuba. Oliver opened the door and invited him in. He was already wearing his tux and was busy looking at stock market figures on his phone. Congratulations on marrying your sister off, Dorian exclaimed, grinning from ear to ear. Oliver raised his eyebrows. Dorian helped himself to a small bottle of whiskey from the minibar and sat down on a chair. Just then, his phone rang. It was Gavin. Dorian, are you in the States? Have you seen my sister? Dorian was puzzled. Which sister? Mackenzie, you moron. Why would I have seen her? Isn't she in Havana with you? Gavin sighed with frustration. I can't believe this. No one knows where she is. Why? What's wrong? She went to an auction in Washington with her fiancé a few days ago. I haven't heard from her since, and she won't pick up her phone. I sent someone to look for her, but so far, no news. Apparently, she left the auction by herself. Her fiancé doesn't know where she went either. That's terrible, Gavin. Yesterday, her bank called me when they couldn't reach her. Someone's been using her credit card in New York. I don't know what to do. I don't have anyone there who can help me, and my family cut me off from my finances. Maybe her fiancé knows something and isn't telling you, Dorian suggested. But she couldn't have run away. Perhaps she's in New York using her credit card. I heard Oliver was at the auction that day. Have you seen him around? Dorian put down his bottle and looked at Oliver, who was now busy fixing his hair. As a matter of fact, I have. Is he in Aruba? Are you all there for Xavier and Esther's wedding? Gavin asked. Yes, we're all here. Gavin hung up before Dorian could say anything else, and he signaled to one of his henchmen. Oliver's in Aruba. I want you to check out the Williams family and see if there's been any suspicious activity. The henchman nodded and left. The bridesmaids chatted excitedly in Esther's room after putting on their dresses and makeup. They surrounded Sydney and asked her all sorts of questions about Norman. What's he like? Esther asked, her eyes widening with curiosity. You know, in bed. Yeah, tell us, Nancy added. We're all dying to know. He's so strong and sexy. Ashley, Rose, and Hannah exchanged knowing glances and smiled. Helga was the only one in the room who didn't have the slightest interest in Norman. Sydney blushed and lowered her eyes, pretending to smooth her dress. Well, we actually didn't. We haven't really. The women stared at her in astonishment. Esther grabbed Sydney's arm. Are you serious? You and Norman haven't done it yet? No way. No, we haven't. Nancy was puzzled. But I thought the two of you were already married and living together. We are, and we share a bed. We lie there and hold hands. He kissed me on the forehead and cheeks a few times, but we haven't gotten around to anything else. Esther's jaw dropped. You mean you haven't even French kissed? Sydney, you've just shattered my image of Norman. I thought he was a man's man. Nancy laughed. Not everyone's an animal like Xavier. Don't you dare talk about my husband that way, Esther teased. She turned to Sydney. Darling, if he doesn't make a move, you have to initiate it. Do you know what to do? I thought about it, but I didn't want to pressure him, Sydney said defensively. I was always the one chasing him, but he never considered me more than a friend. We weren't even in a relationship when he saved me from Joshua and married me. I just have to be patient. Esther patted her on the back. I get it, but I think it's time. Our main task today is to put Norman in the mood for some fun. We'll make sure the two of you have a night you'll never forget. Nancy smiled. I wonder what he would think if he heard us talking about him like this. It was time for the ceremony. The parents of the brides and grooms had arrived, and a large makeshift altar decorated with various exotic flowers had been set up on the beach. There were 2 bridesmaids and 2 groomsmen for each couple. It had been decided that Rose, Ashley, Jack, and Steve would stand with Sydney and Norman, and that Nancy, Hannah, Latham, and Dorian would be by Esther and Xavier's side. Norman had also chosen Jonathan to be his best man. Ashley watched as Latham took his place at the altar next to Xavier. He had arrived late the previous night, so she hadn't seen him yet. She thought he looked incredibly handsome in his gray tuxedo and white shirt with his thick, wavy hair, though he was still incredibly thin. What's wrong with him? She wondered. He's so sullen. She then turned to look at Norman, who was also wearing a tuxedo but with a red tie. Despite his formal attire, there was still something wild and unrefined about him. But his tan skin and winning smile made all the women swoon. When the music began to play, Ashley and Rose walked down the aisle and took their place on Norman and Sydney's side of the altar. Sydney soon followed, walking arm in arm with her mother, who smiled at everyone as she passed by. Now that she knew exactly who Norman was, and they had gotten rid of the Fishers, she was pleased for her daughter. Her impression of Norman had also increased when she saw Jonathan standing next to him. She couldn't wait for Sydney's father to be released from prison so they could all start a new life together. Next, Esther's father, Richard, walked her down the aisle, and she took her place opposite Xavier. Before the wedding officiant began the ceremony, Jonathan said a few words to Norman and patted his shoulder. Man, I know you've had a hard life, and we've been through a lot together. I want you to know I love you and wish you and Sydney all the happiness in the world. You deserve it. Norman nodded and wiped away a tear. Xavier's father also gave a few words of encouragement. Son, be good to Esther. Love her and cherish her for the rest of your life. I hope you'll both be as happy as your mother and I have been. Xavier hugged him. Thanks, Dad. I will. Inspired by their speeches, Mabel took Sydney's hand and looked into her eyes. My darling, you're about to become a wife. I can't tell you how proud I am of you, and I know your father would feel the same way if you were here today. Take care of each other, and never forget that we love you very much. Sydney nodded as she choked back tears. I love you too, Mom. She turned to Norman and placed her hands in his. Norman winked at Mabel. I promise to take good care of her, Mom. Mabel sniffled, moved by his words. On the other side of the altar, Richard beamed at Xavier. I hope you and Esther will visit us often. You still owe me a game of chess. Xavier laughed. I've been practicing ever since you badly beat me. You're on. Lisa, Esther's mother, suddenly burst into tears as she remembered Olivia's wedding over a year ago. Esther comforted her, knowing exactly what she was thinking. It's okay, Mom. I know she's here, smiling down at us. Oliver sat in the front row and gazed at her. He had wondered what she would look like in her wedding dress, but nothing had prepared him for her dazzling beauty. She was wearing the diamond necklace he had purchased at the auction in Washington a few weeks ago. He couldn't believe the woman he loved was marrying someone else. Toward the end of the ceremony, Xavier and Esther exchanged rings. I guess that's it, Oliver thought. I've lost her forever. He glanced at her necklace again, which shone brightly in the sunlight. Norman also placed a ring on Sydney's finger. He then took her hands in his. I promise to be faithful and love you for the rest of my life. She was so happy, she thought she would burst into tears. He makes me feel so safe and secure. So what if we haven't slept together yet? He's mine now, and we're going to have a wonderful life together. His palms were wet, and she noticed a few beads of sweat on his forehead. She knew he was nervous, which made her adore him even more. Jack grinned at them, proud that his friend was finally getting married. The officiator pronounced each couple man and wife. The grooms can now kiss their brides. Nancy watched intently as Norman kissed Sydney, knowing it was their first proper kiss. Esther momentarily forgot that she was also supposed to kiss her husband, and she craned her neck to look at the other newlyweds. Hey, what are you looking at? I'm over here, Xavier joked, taking her in his arms and giving her a big, wet, passionate kiss on the lips. I love you, Mrs. Sloane. She laughed and hugged him tightly. I love you too, Mr. Sloane. Xavier was irritated that his wife had been distracted at their wedding by another man. He could only tolerate so much and deliberately deepened the kiss. Below the stage, Oliver saw what was happening and turned away. He grabbed his phone, sent a message to Esther saying that he had work to do, and left. From a different standpoint, Nancy was avidly watching Norman and Sydney, waiting for Norman to kiss his new wife again, but more passionately. She was disappointed when her eyes were covered by a hand, and a very familiar voice spoke in her ear. Are you feeling antsy? Jonathan asked softly. If you want it so badly, we're good to go by my calculation. I don't think there's any danger to the babies, so perhaps you should focus your energies on us instead. Her legs went weak. He was right. They had made it past the 3-month mark, but she was no longer in the mood for it regardless. On the stage, Norman's heart skipped a beat. Only a few yards away, she could see that Xavier and Esther were kissing deeply, and he glanced at Sydney. She seemed as shy as he felt because she wouldn't look at him properly either. She lowered her eyes and gave all of her attention to the diamond ring on her finger. She was smaller and more delicate than Norman. Although she was wearing high heels, She felt tiny next to him, and she loved that feeling. He took a step closer to her and put his arms around her waist. His heart was beating fast, and he felt as nervous as he had been when he had gone out on his first mission, perhaps even more nervous. There were so many people around, and he felt hot. However, when he thought about the anticipation that he had briefly seen in her eyes, he lowered his head and moved closer. Her body was stiff, and for a moment, it seemed as though they were both frozen in time. He continued to inch closer until he touched his mouth to hers. Her lips were soft and elastic and tasted indescribably sweet. He felt as if something had exploded in his brain. All the noise around him had receded, and everything else faded out of sight. He was aware of only her and her lips, and it made him feel alive. Sydney had secretly kissed him before, but she had only been that close to him twice. She had been so nervous at the time that she hadn't really felt anything. He seemed so tough, so she hadn't expected his lips to also be soft. He smelled clean and pleasantly familiar. Her heart was beating so fast that it felt like it was going to jump out of her throat. She didn't realize that she had grabbed Norman's arm and was wrinkling his shirt. When his tongue reached hers, her ears started buzzing. All the chaotic thoughts that had plagued her left her head. She leaned into him as best she could in her wedding dress and responded somewhat awkwardly. Nancy could hear that everything had suddenly gone quiet and was curious to see why, but her eyes were being covered by her husband. She was anxious to be rid of his hand, but his mouth had joined his hand in imprisoning her. She whimpered. She didn't think they needed to join the newlyweds in their first kiss and would rather have watched the final piece of the ceremony. But Jonathan didn't let go of Nancy until the two couples on the stage had finished. When Nancy saw the light of day once again, all she saw was Sydney leaning against Norman's chest shyly. She felt depressed that she had missed the crucial moment and wondered if any of her friends had recorded it. The time then came for both sets of newlyweds to throw their bouquets. There were many people in the crowd, rubbing their hands eagerly in anticipation, and both bunches of flowers flew toward them at the same time. Ashley and Hannah were standing together. As the bouquets flew over their heads, Ashley instinctively stretched out her hand and jumped. She was tall, and her arms were long, so she had a big reach advantage. She just managed to grab one with the tips of her fingers. "I got it!" she cried, overjoyed. But she was unaware that someone had stepped on her skirt, so she slipped and fell backward. She was on the edge of the stage and realized too late that it was going to be a decent fall. Her instinct was to reach out and grab the nearest person, but before she could, she felt a gust of wind and someone grabbing her around the waist. She was pulled back up into the hard chest of a man, and still holding the flowers, she wrapped her arms around his neck. The thumb was hit by both the familiar scent of the woman he loved and a burst of the flower fragrance. He looked down, and his eyes met Ashley's. The surroundings were noisy again. Rose, who had snatched the other bunch of flowers, was very excited. She was arguing with Dorian, who had almost caught them instead. All the others who had missed out were watching on with amusement. The thumb's arm was still tightly wrapped around Ashley, and through her thin clothes, she could clearly feel his heartbeat. It was beating to the same rhythm as hers. Her throat was slightly dry, but she still managed to smile and croak out his name. Latham. When his name was spoken, he snapped back to reality and slowly let go of Ashley's waist. "Are you all right?" She nodded. "Yes, I'm fine. Thank you for catching me." He smiled. "You're welcome." She unwound her arm from his neck and held the bouquet to her nose. She sniffed it delicately and smiled. "I took catching the bouquet slightly too seriously, I think." The sun was shining brightly, and they were surrounded by a sea of flowers. The setting was very romantic. Ashley held the beautiful flowers in her hands, and her cheeks were slightly red. Her lips were the same color and very full, and Latham watched them move, as if in a trance. "Yes," he replied. Ashley lowered her gaze because she didn't know what to say. The man in the front of her seemed a little different from before. and she couldn't easily guess what he was feeling from his expression. She cleared her throat. I should go. Okay. He watched her as she walked away. The others around her were all envious that she had caught the bouquet, but at that moment, Ashley only felt an overwhelming sense of loss. She concluded that Latham really didn't have any feelings for her anymore, and that he had only saved her because it was the polite thing to do. He hadn't said much at all, and had just watched her leave with flowers that symbolized love. Latham watched Ashley leave, and the polite smile on his face gradually disappeared and turned into a frown. He subtly bent down and rubbed his leg. The ceremony had ended, so the next thing to do was to celebrate. Some people stayed on the stage to dance, while others put on swimsuits to have some fun in the water. Ashley clutched the bouquet she had caught and wasn't sure where to go until she heard a familiar voice in conversation. I'll be leaving soon, Brock was saying to Hannah. Will you come to lunch with me? Ashley rolled her eyes, because her brother was getting good at getting others around to his point of view. She was slightly concerned that he was taking advantage of Hannah's soft heart. Sure enough, he heard Hannah wavering. I'm not really hungry. I'm hungry, Brock said. Just come with me to eat. You know that I don't really know anyone else here. It'll be awkward for me to sit alone. When Ashley heard that, she wanted to jump out and remind her brother that she was there and that he could sit with her, but she didn't want to spoil things for him, so she tried to keep her presence unknown. She could see from her vantage point that Hannah had been moved by Brock's words. Okay. Brock was happy. He grabbed Hannah's hand, and they walked together toward the restaurant. From Ashley's perspective, Hannah gave the appearance of wanting to break free, but she was allowing him to behave atrociously. Ashley smiled and walked toward the villa to change her clothes. She planned to go for a swim, because it was still early and she wasn't hungry at that point. She made her way to the largest swimming pool on the island. There were already a few others in the water, and Dorian and Rose were among them. They had been play fighting since the bouquets had been tossed and had continued it into the pool. Rose was good at fighting on land, but she was average in water, so the two of them were evenly matched. It was funny to watch, and Ashley had a sudden urge to laugh until she thought of Latham. He was usually a lively presence at big gatherings, even after Olivia had passed away. But he was clearly not in high spirits at the wedding that day. He hadn't laughed sincerely at all. As she thought about it, Ashley sank into the water and began to swim silently. There weren't many people in the pool at first, but others gradually made their way over. Ashley knew a lot of them, and when Nancy realized how many had congregated, she suggested a game before lunch. Esther was the first to agree. Okay, what are you thinking? We could divide into pairs. We'll mix up the men and women and have a relay competition. We'll draw straws for the groups, though. Rose was the first to agree. Okay, raise your hand if you're in. Esther and Nancy looked at each other with knowing smiles. When Nancy saw that no one had any objections, she opened an app on her phone. She was putting in all the names for a random draw when Latham said, I'll be the judge. Dorian was confused and teased him. No way. Why? Are you on your period? Everyone laughed, but Latham stayed calm. I had my appendix removed recently, and I'm taking a long time to fully recover. I need to rest. Are you all right? Jonathan asked. Do you want Helga to take a look? I'm fine. I just ate some spicy food at the dinner yesterday. I'll just pay better attention from now on. He was left alone after that, and the teams were drawn. The results were out quickly. Nancy with Norman, Ashley with Jonathan, Rose with Jack, Steve with Helga, Esther with Dorian, and Sydney with Xavier. After the partnerships were read out, Sydney quietly made a confession. I don't know how to swim. Xavier raised his hand and said the same, very quickly predicting a loss for them. Nancy was feeling kind and considerate, so she changed the rules. It'll still work. Those that can't swim can run or walk through the water. The deepest part is only 5 feet. No one will drown. Sydney was relieved to hear that, and they all took their places on either side of the pool. Jonathan looked at Nancy and frowned slightly. Take it easy. It doesn't matter if you go slowly. Nancy dismissed his concern. Norman's here. With him around, I don't have to worry about anything. Jonathan's expression darkened after that proclamation. Latham, as the judge, got them going. Everyone, get ready. 3, 2, 1, go. In all the pairings, the men happened to be the faster swimmers, so the women all went first. Despite her pregnancy, Nancy didn't find it difficult because she had always been a good swimmer. She reached Norman quickly, and they high-fived so that he could jump in and have his turn. In the next lane, Jonathan had already set off and was a little ahead of Norman because Ashley had been slightly faster than Nancy. Nancy felt a little conflicted as she sat on the edge. She wasn't sure if she should cheer for her teammate or her husband. Her internal struggle only lasted a few seconds, and she cheered loudly for Jonathan. But before Nancy could shout again, she noticed a situation developing. Although Sydney didn't know how to swim, she did her best by walking through the water toward her teammate. Helga, however, was standing motionless and expressionless at the edge of the pool. On the other end, Steve was standing open-mouthed. Why are you coming over? Helga looked at him and spoke calmly. I don't know how to swim. Steve was speechless. He felt like stomping his feet in irritation at her inactivity and lack of desire to win. He looked at Sydney, who was struggling bravely through the water. It was clear from his expression that he felt Helga should just give it a go. I'm a little afraid of water, Helga said. It wasn't just that she didn't know how to swim, but she didn't even want to get in. Steve decided to ignore her. I'll go first. He dived into the water and started swimming toward her. On the other side of the pool, Ashley was watching Jonathan excitedly because he was about to reach the finish line. Quickly, we're going to win! In the other lane, Norman was trying his best to catch up to him, but Ashley and Rose had reached the other side together. And Nancy had been behind them when she had handed over to Norman. Although he had caught up to Jack, he was finding it difficult to catch up to Jonathan. Ashley jumped up and down at the edge of the pool. We're going to win! Come on, Jonathan! Latham noted the excited expression on Ashley's face, and he felt a little bitter. He thought back to the day that she had taken the initiative to find him in his office, and they had gone out to lunch together. Does that visit mean that she still has some feelings for me? He wondered. If it wasn't for my legs. He watched absent-mindedly until he heard Ashley cheer again. Wow, you're awesome! First place! She was still jumping up and down, but the pool area was wet, and she slipped. Before anyone could stop her, she fell to the ground with a thud. She fell harder than when she had been after the flowers. She lay on the ground miserably in the aftermath and didn't want to move at all. She turned her head and saw that Latham was only several feet away from her. But he didn't move and seemed to have no intention of helping a second time. Jonathan had finished his lap and pulled himself out of the water. He quickly walked over to Ashley and helped her sit up. Are you hurt? Norman and Jack, who had arrived at the finish line together, also went over. Are you all right? Everyone surrounded her and showed their concern, and Ashley showed her appreciation with a smile. My hands saved me from the worst of it. I'm fine. She stood up with Jonathan's help. Latham still hadn't moved a muscle. As if she had sensed his gaze, she looked in his direction. Her eyes met his, and he quickly looked away. She suddenly felt cold. He hadn't moved to help or gone over to show he cared. She felt cut off and bereft as it became clear that all the twists and turns that had defined their relationship really had exhausted all the feelings between them. By that stage, Dorian had also arrived, and he was a little put out. 4th place? I thought I would be in the top 3 no matter what. His words drew everyone's attention back to the pool. Steve had already finished swimming his lap. He was big on team spirit and decided to try again to get Helga to complete the race. I'm beside you. We can walk over together. Helga looked at him indifferently, as if she didn't understand what he was trying to do. She met his gaze calmly. I'm not going. At that point, Sydney had just made it to the other end so that Xavier could start his swim. Steve stood in front of Helga with a mocking smile on his lips. He was quite enjoying the fact that the woman who thought she knew everything clearly didn't, but he decided that he had put enough effort in. He climbed back into the pool and left her to her stubbornness. Helga just leaned against the fence and forfeited the competition without feeling any undue pressure. The group had decided that there would be rewards and punishments among the 6 teams. The first place didn't need to drink, the second place had to drink 1 shot, the third place had to drink 2, and so on and so forth. With Nancy being pregnant, Jonathan drank her share as the second place getter, but that leniency didn't apply to any of the others. Steve and Helga had come in last in the competition, and they each had 5 shot glasses lined up in front of them. Helga frowned slightly. She usually didn't drink strong alcohol, but she was also a rule follower and swallowed them all. She felt a little dizzy afterward, and she quickly went to her room for some water to counteract the effects. As the second to the last team, Sydney looked at the 4 shots in front of her and then gazed at Norman pitifully. Norman felt that she had no choice but to drink. He wanted to help, but because of the rules, he couldn't. She took a deep breath and downed all of them, one after the other. She felt the burn all the way from her throat to her stomach and thought her whole body had turned into a ball of fire. "Water!" she shouted. She took a bottle from Norman and poured it down her throat, but it only seemed to make the fire in her stomach burn more fiercely. Along with the fire in her stomach, the alcohol seemed to have numbed her brain, and she suddenly felt faint. Nancy saw what was happening and raised her eyebrows knowingly at Esther. Norman's original plan had been to help Sydney walk back to the room to change her clothes, but she could barely walk straight. It wasn't working, so he bent over and picked her up instead. Her skin felt soft, and he could smell her natural scent pushing through the chlorine and alcohol. He carried her back to her room, placed her on the couch, and went to find her clean clothes. She lay weakly on the couch. She wore a bikini, but it felt tight, so she reached behind her neck and pulled the tie loose. She let out a comfortable sigh, but then decided it wasn't enough. She pulled at the tie behind her back and pulled the whole thing off. She immediately felt like she was breathing more freely. The world was spinning for her, so she lay on her back to stop the sensation. When Norman came back with some fresh clothes, he came upon the unexpected scene. Sydney had nothing on her upper body. Her long hair was wet and was spread out over the arm of the couch. Her skin was pale, and on the dark couch, the contrast was intense. Possibly due to the alcohol she had drunk, her body was suffused with a slightly pink luster, as though she had been covered with a layer of pink satin. Norman stopped in his tracks. He was still holding on to the clothes, but he didn't know whether to move forward or avoid the situation entirely. Sydney had no knowledge of his dilemma. She rubbed her temple to ease the throbbing in her head, but when it couldn't be alleviated, she rolled over. But the couch wasn't very big, and she looked like she was about to fall to the ground. Instantly, the previously hesitant Norman was on the couch to catch her. "Oh," she said and sighed softly. She then wrapped her arms around his neck. His body suddenly stiffened, and he couldn't help but look at her flawless body. He was unable to put her down. Sydney was barely conscious, and she clung instinctively to Norman when he caught her. He became even more aware of the softness of her skin against his bare arms. His breathing became ragged, and his brain went numb. He didn't move and hugged her tight. She clearly liked the feel of him next to her because she burrowed further into his arms. He felt a surge of desire and tightened his hold. "Oh, Norman," she said as she smelled his familiar scent. It gave her a strong sense of security. Her voice was soft and mellow because she was so drunk. "My hubby." She had wanted to call him that at the wedding, but she hadn't had the chance. She had felt hindered and embarrassed then by the number of people that had been around. But the alcohol had made her feel bolder than usual. She tried the word out several times, and she fancied that his eyes flickered with emotion every time she called him her husband. She wasn't sure if it was an illusion or not, but she liked doing it. And she liked him. He was so handsome in her eyes. She smiled and spoke with more certainty. "Norman, my husband." However, before she could finish the word again, her mouth was silenced by his own. A familiar yet strange feeling engulfed her. His kiss was completely different from what it had been at the wedding. It felt shockingly hot and powerful, and she almost forgot how to breathe. Norman also felt like his entire world was spinning. He didn't know what was going on and reacted instinctively as he picked her up. She was vaguely aware that she was being carried and placed on soft bedding, and that she was then being pressed against a hard chest. It was noon and time to eat, but neither of them was aware of that at all. The atmosphere in the room grew hotter and more intense as they entered a new era in their relationship. At the same time, Nancy and Esther were in the dining hall, looking at their watches and smiling with a shared understanding. Their plan for the rest of the day was just to move freely about the island and explore. Jonathan had made sure there was a speedboat available, so after some consideration, they decided to take the boat out and go diving after they had eaten. Norman and Sydney hadn't returned by the time lunch was over, and they decided not to wait for the newlyweds. Brock had already left, and Hannah had gone with him to say goodbye. When she returned, the whole group was talking about going out to sea. The plan was quickly settled, and everyone went to their rooms to get the necessary equipment before heading to the speedboat together. The sea breeze swirled around them, but after the cold of New York, it was pleasantly comfortable. The speedboat was being driven by an island local, and they had also provided a diving instructor. When they reached their destination, the driver stopped the boat and pointed out the range of the dive. Almost everyone had been snorkeling before and was keen and prepared to go into the water. Steve, however, didn't move. He was looking at Helga, who was watching on calmly. It had been obvious that she was afraid of water, and he couldn't understand why she was there. He was very surprised to see her putting on all the gear under the guidance of the instructor. She was soon ready to go into the water, and Steve looked at her with raised eyebrows. Helga met his gaze with her own questioning look. "Do you need help?" Steve frowned. "Aren't you afraid of water?" "I've taken some medication to suppress my fear. Plus, I'm very interested in whether there are any medicinal herbs in the sea." Steve was wild, because he felt that she had blown the race on purpose, and he decided that it was better for him not to talk to her. He was a little worried that he wouldn't be able to control himself and his anger if he did. He hid what he was feeling and made sure he stayed composed. He decided to ignore her completely and jumped into the water. Nancy and Jonathan had already started to feed little fish with the food they had been provided. After a while, she looked at Jonathan excitedly. "I think there's a starfish below. Can you dive down and help me scoop it up?" Jonathan naturally agreed and dived into the water. He managed to get a hold of the purple starfish and he handed it to Nancy, who took pictures with her waterproof camera. Nancy looked at the photos with satisfaction and then passed the starfish to Ashley. "Do you want a photo too?" Ashley got herself organized for it, and Nancy was about to say something when she realized that Latham hadn't gone into the water. She was puzzled and lightly tapped Jonathan's arm. "Do you think that Latham's acting strangely?" Jonathan had noticed the same thing. "He has been very quiet recently." "Yeah, he would have been first in the water in the past." Nancy looked at Dorian, who was fighting another water battle with Rose, and then sighed. He was never as crazy as Dorian, but he's never been like he is now. By that stage, Jonathan had reached the speedboat and Latham. "Don't you want to come in and play around for a while?" Latham was wearing a swimsuit, and the only scarring was a faint one on the spot where he had fallen, but it wasn't very noticeable. He smiled. "My stomach isn't feeling too great. I don't think it would be good for anyone." His excuse rang true, and Jonathan couldn't find fault with it. On the other side of the boat, Dorian had found a big red octopus underwater, and it had attracted everyone's attention. On the boat itself, Latham looked down and rubbed his leg. His eyes were hollow with disappointment. When Ashley had fallen at the pool, he hadn't wanted to stand by and be of no assistance, but he had suddenly found that he couldn't move. He had tried his best throughout the day to hide the fact that there was a problem with his leg. But he knew that there were some things that couldn't remain hidden. He also knew that Jonathan had started to suspect something. But Xavier was his best friend, and it would be impossible for him not to attend his wedding. He sighed, and then he was startled when a pair of hands suddenly appeared at the edge of the boat. His eyes met Ashley's as she pulled herself up. She exchanged glances with him and quickly looked away. Latham hadn't expected to be alone on the speedboat with Ashley. He wondered if she was avoiding looking at him or talking to him because he hadn't helped her when she had fallen by the pool. He wasn't sure what she was thinking. The diving instructor and the boat's driver saw them and asked if they were going to get in the water. Latham and Ashley shook their heads at the same time. "I'll take you to another special place then," the driver said excitedly. He readied the boat for takeoff without saying anything more. "The others are still in the water," Ashley said. "That's okay. It's only a few minutes away. And you can catch a few crabs while I go back to the others." He started the speedboat and took off for one of the small islands that were scattered across the sea. As he promised, the small island was only a few minutes away. The driver stopped the boat. "This island is uninhabited. There's no danger unless you count sea crabs under the reef. If you don't want to go into the water with the others, you can pick up some sea crabs here." He then pointed to the coconut trees on the island. "There's shelter under the trees if you need it. The sun can be intense, so you don't want to get burned." Ashley thanked him with a smile. She had gotten onto the boat again because she thought her period was on its way, and she thought it was better to be safe than sorry. Once the driver of the boat had finished giving his instructions, he went back to the boat. "You guys rest here for a while, and I'll go and grab the others." Latham waved at the driver to let him know they had heard. He and Ashley were suddenly all alone on a small island of only a couple thousand square feet. The surroundings were quiet, and the only sounds were the waves hitting the beach behind them and the faint chirping of birds in the distance. The atmosphere suddenly felt heated. Ashley felt awkward and was searching for a topic to break the weirdness between them when Latham suddenly stumbled. She instinctively stopped and steadied him. "Are you okay?" Latham felt as if his ankle had lost all feeling. He stood motionless for a few seconds until he regained sensation in it. "I just stepped on something and sprained it. I'm fine." "Oh." She slowly let go of his arm. He took a step forward, but he was unable to maintain his balance in the deep sand. He was aware that it made him look lame as he walked, but he blamed it on the uneven beach. Ashley thought his foot hurt because he had sprained it, so she deliberately slowed her pace. "Why don't we go over there and take a seat in the shade? We can see if it's swollen or not." He nodded. The two of them headed to the tree, and Latham sat down. He rubbed his ankle and smiled. "It's fine now." Ashley squatted and took a closer look. She saw that there was only a small scratch on it and heaved a sigh of relief. She looked at the reef in the distance. "Do you eat crabs?" "You don't have to catch any for my sake, but be careful if you do go." Ashley nodded, hesitated for a moment, and then sat down in the empty space beside Latham. It was a beautiful beach, and although it was hot in the sun, it was very cool under the shade of the trees. She was wearing a bikini, but she had wrapped herself up in her beach towel. She brushed fine sand off the towel as she thought about what to say. "When are you heading back to New York?" "Tomorrow morning." He had initially been booked on a flight for that afternoon, but he had asked his assistant to change it after seeing Ashley at the wedding. He figured that that bird had flown, but he felt that he had to know for sure. "You've been quite busy with work recently, haven't you?" Ashley asked. "Yes. We received a few big orders, and we're expanding, so it's quite busy." He turned to look at her. "How are you doing at the Davis Group? Is it all working out?" "It's going well. My colleagues don't know that I'm Jonathan's sister, but they still take good care of me." She smiled. "It feels pretty good." "That's great." They fell into silence until Ashley's phone interrupted the peace and quiet. She picked it up and saw that it was Peter calling, but she had no idea why. She glanced instinctively at Latham and hesitated for a few seconds before answering. "Hi, what's up?" Peter sounded as though he was smiling when he spoke. The wedding's over, right? How's your day at the beach? It's good. It feels like summer here, and the scenery is stunning. Ashley thought for a second and moved away to continue the call. You'll be back the day after tomorrow, right? My dad's here on a business trip this weekend, so we should have dinner together. Ashley felt caught off guard. Your dad will be there? I'm not sure it's a good idea. She and Peter had been on a few casual dates, but they hadn't formalized anything, and she wasn't sure that she wanted to. She knew that meeting parents was a big step and often changed things. Peter smiled and said teasingly, We're only friends because of my father. Then it would be pretty low-key. Don't tell me you're nervous. No, it would just feel like I'm officially meeting the parents. You've already met them, and we're all friends. Besides, he probably wants to see you more than he wants to see me. I'll make arrangements and let you know. All right, Ashley smiled. But we're just going as friends. No problem, Peter said. See you then. Have fun over there, but be careful not to burn to a crisp. You've got to get a little bit of sun on holiday, though. He laughed in response. Under the shade of the tree, Latham looked at Ashley while her back was turned. He was mesmerized by her long legs poking out from under her towel. He was slightly discouraged that she had moved away to take the call and that she never used the same relaxed and pleasant tone when she was with him. She had in the past, but he hadn't taken advantage of her kindness and lost her. Even though there was some distance between them, he had heard Ashley say something about meeting parents. He was astute enough to know that the person on the other end of the phone was Peter. Has their relationship developed that far? He wondered. Latham realized it was impossible to ignore his feelings for Ashley, no matter how hard he tried. He hated the fact that she was dating Peter and was already making plans to meet his parents. He thought about the wedding ceremony earlier and how beautiful she had looked in her bridesmaid's dress. What would she look like in a wedding dress? And who is she going to marry? He wondered bitterly. He just wanted to get out of there, go back to New York, and forget about the trip to Aruba. Ashley finished her conversation with Peter and put her phone away. He noticed she had a huge smile on her face. Talking to Peter had clearly put her in a good mood. But her smile disappeared when she remembered she was stranded there with Latham. She went and sat down next to him again. An awkward silence followed, and she dug her feet in the sand. I guess we have nothing to say to each other, he thought grimly. He looked off into the distance at the endless sea in front of them. Ashley frowned and thought about the awkwardness of the situation. Where the heck are the others? Why hasn't the boat come back for us? It's been over an hour. Sometime later, she took her phone out of her knapsack again and suddenly realized it was dead. Latham, my phone just died. Do you know what time it is? I think they may have forgotten about us. He smacked his forehead with his palm and groaned. What's wrong? She asked. I left my phone on the boat. When they arrived at the island and had gotten off the boat, his leg had been hurting, so he hadn't been focused on much else. He hadn't even realized that he had left his phone on the seat of the boat. Ashley sighed with frustration. What are we going to do? We have no way of contacting anyone, and it's going to be dark soon. Yeah, I know. The sun's setting. He looked at the waves crashing against the shore. Ashley, I think the tide is rising. The inlet's going to be submerged soon. I didn't even notice it until now. Oh no, I don't want to die here. They had both been resting with their eyes closed, so neither of them had noticed the change in sea level. She looked around in desperation. The islet they were on was tiny and had only a few trees. They were already at the highest point, but the tide was rising quickly. Latham calculated that at the rate the water was rising, it would only be an hour tops before it reached them. I don't know what we can do, he said. Half the island has already been flooded since we arrived. There are some coconut trees over there, but we can't climb them. She started to panic. We can't just stand here and wait to be drowned. Why don't we swim to another island? He nodded slowly. Yeah, I remember passing one earlier. It was bigger than this one and had a higher peak. If we can make it over, we can climb to the top and wait for the tide to ebb. How far is it from here? He shrugged. I'm not sure. It's hard to tell from the boat. A few miles, maybe? It may take us up to a half an hour to swim across. He looked down at his leg, wondering whether he could make it. Normally, he was a powerful swimmer, but his legs had been weak since the attack in Ashley's hallway. Ashley looked at him expectantly. When he didn't say anything further, she walked around the dry area of the islet and suddenly pointed at something in the distance. Look, it's over there. It's not that far. I think we can swim. Latham was silent for a while and then finally nodded. Okay, I guess we have no choice. The sun had already begun to set. The sea was calm, but he knew the weather could change at any moment. With a strong wind, they would be swallowed up by powerful waves, even if they were skilled swimmers. But if we stay here, the water will eventually engulf the entire island, and it'll be too late to swim across to the other one if it gets dark, he thought. Better to take the risk now. If my legs give way, at least Ashley can swim safely to shore. He took a deep breath and walked down to the narrow beach. Okay, let's go. She nodded, grabbed the snorkel and goggles she had taken off the boat with her, and followed him. She was a good swimmer and was sure it wouldn't take them long to reach the other island. They waded into the water, and Ashley put her snorkeling gear on. She floated on top of the water for a while, and then took a deep breath and began kicking her legs. Luckily, there was no current, but they were swimming against the tide. Latham, who didn't have any snorkeling gear and was still suffering from his sore ankle, found it hard to keep up with her. He stared at the island in the distance. It seemed so close earlier when they had been on the boat, but swimming across to it was another matter. They swam for a good 15 minutes before Ashley stopped to catch her breath. She turned around to look at Latham, who was several feet behind her. He appeared to be struggling and was moving stiffly in the water. What's wrong with him? She wondered. I thought he was a good swimmer. Maybe I was wrong. She floated in the water, waiting for him to catch up to her. Despite trying as hard as she could and exerting all his energy, he still found it difficult to move through the water. His ankle was in so much pain, he thought he would pass out. His leg was numb, and he could only keep himself afloat with his arms. Suddenly, a strong current pushed him back. He tried to move forward, but he remained in the same spot. His breathing became labored, and his arms gave way. He looked around desperately for Ashley, but she was far ahead of him. A large wave suddenly came crashing down on Latham. He gasped for breath, trying to stay above the water. The seawater stung his eyes, and he had no feelings in his legs. This is it, he thought. I'll never reach the island. It's too far away. Ashley watched him in wide-eyed horror as he flailed about with his arms. What is he doing? She wondered. Why isn't he using his legs? She had felt confident they could swim across the island, but watching Latham struggle, she realized he needed help. He didn't know what to do and was sure he couldn't continue like that. His legs were useless, and the pain in his ankle was getting worse. He spat out a mouthful of water and kept gasping. Suddenly, Ashley appeared out of nowhere and grabbed his arm. Her powerful grip pulled him back above the water. Latham, what's wrong? She was clearly anxious. Are you in pain? He rubbed his eyes and nodded. Yes, I am. I'm sorry you had to come back for me. Is it your stomach? Don't worry, I'll help you. Just hang on to me. We're almost there. No, Ashley, I'm way too heavy for you. Just go ahead. I'll catch up eventually. But before he could continue protesting, she grabbed him around the waist with one arm, put her head in the water, and pulled him along. She kicked her legs furiously, but because she wasn't wearing any fins, they moved slowly in the water. Latham felt bad for her, but didn't see another solution. His whole body was aching, and the waves were getting bigger. Soon it would be dark. We're doomed if we get stuck in a strong current, he thought, panicking. We'll be pushed back and won't ever make it to the island. Ashley was a strong swimmer, but with his dead weight, he figured they would need at least another 20 minutes to reach the island. He was wrong. Half an hour later, they were still in the water. Ashley stopped to catch her breath. We're getting closer. I just need to rest for a few minutes. You're a lot heavier than I thought. She looked at his face, which had turned pale. He was trying hard to hide his suffering, but she could see he was close to passing out. Come on, we have a few hundred feet to go, she urged him. Don't give up now. Just then, she felt a strong current pulling them back, and she lost her grip on Latham. She turned around to grab him, but it was too late. He had already been swept away. She saw him bobbing above the water, barely conscious. If I don't go after him, he's going to drown, she thought. She took a deep breath and swam against the current with all her strength. She reached him a minute later and grabbed his hand. He stared at her in wide-eyed astonishment. It was as if he didn't know where he was. She charged ahead, trying to go around the current. As they got closer to the shore, the waves propelled them forward. Latham held on to her for dear life, gasping for breath. She held tightly onto his hand. Hang on, we're almost there. Finally, she felt her feet touch the bottom of the seabed, and she pulled him up. The look on his face, though, made her panic. He had turned deathly pale and seemed to be on his last breath. She quickly put her arms around his chest and dragged him out of the water onto the beach. She then lay him on a dry, flat area and knelt beside him. His eyes were closed, and he didn't seem to be breathing. Latham, can you hear me? Open your eyes. When he didn't respond, she put her hands on his chest and, recalling her CPR training, began to give him compressions. She then tilted his head, pinched his nose, and sealed his mouth with hers. She gave him 2 breaths and continued the chest compressions while counting. She was exhausted, but knew she had to keep going. She repeated the maneuver several times while praying he would be okay. After the 3rd set of compressions, he coughed up a mouthful of water. She was overjoyed to see that he seemed to be okay. Latham, wake up! Are you all right? He slowly opened his eyes, which were still stinging from the seawater. He saw a blurry face in front of him, and then the image cleared. Ashley, he whispered. Her eyes were red from crying. You scared me half to death. I thought you drowned back there. I pulled you out, but you weren't breathing. He reached out and grabbed her hand. She stared at him in astonishment. His face was so close to hers, and his eyes had a tenderness she had never seen before. Her heart skipped a beat. He held on to her as if he never wanted to let her go. It was almost dark, and the only thing they could hear was the sound of waves crashing against the shore. Are you still in pain? She asked awkwardly. Where does it hurt exactly? I thought you had recovered after your surgery. The pain in his ankle had subsided, and his numb body had regained its senses. He propped himself up onto his elbow. I'm feeling a lot better now. He looked deep into her eyes. Thanks for saving my life. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting magnificent shades of red, orange, and pink across the sky. Ashley blushed from Latham's gaze and smiled awkwardly. It's no big deal. I had my snorkeling gear, so it was easier for me to swim. You would have done the same for me. Can you see the islet we were on from here? Is it flooded? She stood up and shaded her eyes, looking into the distance. I only see a tiny little dot. It's almost entirely submerged beneath the water. Latham made his way to his feet so he could also see the island. Look at those waves crashing against the shore. They must be several feet high. She nodded. We made the right decision, even if it was a bit tricky to swim across. He pointed to a large rock behind them. Maybe we should climb up there. It'll be safer. They walked up to the rock's peak, and stood out looking at the sea from a height of about 50 feet. I think we should be okay up here. The tide can't reach us, Latham said. They found a place to sit and breathed a sigh of relief, exhausted by their adventure. Ashley leaned against a boulder. Do you think the others are okay? I wonder if they're going to come looking for us. The diving instructor is with them, so they should be fine. I don't know why they haven't returned to get us. In any case, they know we're missing, so I assume they'll send someone to locate us. But what's taking them so long? It's been hours since we were dropped off. Further away on a bigger island, Jonathan and the rest of the group had built a fire and were getting ready to grill some fish and crabs. Nancy was ravenous and couldn't wait to eat. She looked at the food with hungry eyes. Look at what Latham and Ashley are missing out on. I bet they regret returning to the hotel. We're going to have a delicious meal. I'm starving after all that diving. He smiled. Maybe they had some things to do. Although they had been slightly puzzled when they had taken off with the boat's driver, he had assumed they wanted to be alone. He knew they still had feelings for one another. He had been unsure whether Latham was serious about his sister until he had seen him sacrifice his freedom in exchange for her release in Cuba. He now realized Latham would make her happy, and he didn't want to interfere in their affairs. Nancy laughed. I wonder what things they have to do in Aruba. I've been so preoccupied with Sydney and Norman that I completely forgot about their blossoming romance. The group chatted and laughed, and Helga neatly cleaned the fish and placed it on the grill above the fire. Helga, you're amazing, Esther commented. Do you like fishing? Not really, but I do eat a lot of fish and seafood, so I've mastered the art of cleaning them. Steve was annoyed. She's so weird. Oddly, she's had time to master all these skills while studying medicine. She must be some sort of psycho prodigy. He was still skeptical about her and had been paying more attention to her lately. He would never forgive himself if she did something to Carol. The food's ready, Helga declared. Everyone was in high spirits as they sat around the fire to eat. Ashley stared blankly into the distance. Latham glanced at her. Are you tired? Why don't you lie down and sleep for a while? She nodded and yawned. Yeah, I'm pretty beat. She lay down, closed her eyes, and fell asleep almost instantly. He watched her chest heaving ever so slightly, with slow, even breaths, and thought she looked like an angel. He hesitated before lying down next to her and putting his arm around her. As he pulled her close, she lifted her head and put it on his chest. He waited to see if she would wake up, but she continued to sleep peacefully. He turned his face sideways so he could see her face. He gazed at her without moving and thought it was the first time they had lain together like that. All of his fragmented memories of her merged into one. Why didn't I take advantage of all those missed opportunities to be with her? He wondered bitterly. We should have done this ages ago. He slid his hand down his aching calf to his ankle. There were still several scars from that horrible night when he had been pulled down the stairs, but they were slowly disappearing. He remembered waking up in the hospital late at night after the incident and feeling an unbearable pain in his ankle. The doctor had told him he had suffered severe damage to a nerve that may never recover and that would cause him to limp. He had stared at him in disbelief and had asked him whether there was a specialist he could recommend to help him rehabilitate. The doctor had said that even if he could fully recover, it would take at least 10 years. Latham's world had crumbled. He was only 30 and in the prime of his life. 10 years seemed like a lifetime. Even if he did miraculously recover, he would be 40 by then. Latham had initially refused to believe the doctor. Once he had been discharged, he tried to walk and found that he was fine for the first few steps, but after a while, his ankle started hurting and he began to limp. He had made appointments with several specialists, therapists, and alternative healers, but they had all said the same thing as the doctor. Some had even told him his limp would get worse over time. He had been devastated. He had always been proud of his good looks and athletic figure and couldn't imagine what people would think when they saw him limping. After that, he had rarely gone out, avoiding dinner invitations and friends' gatherings as much as possible, for fear that people would notice his strange gait. However, when Xavier and Esther invited him to their wedding in Aruba, he knew he couldn't refuse. Esther was Olivia's sister, so he felt an obligation to be there. He had tried his best to hide his limp and the constant ache he felt in his ankle. He had noticed Ashley watching him during the wedding ceremony and knew she still had lingering feelings for him. But he was ashamed and afraid of her reaction if she found out what was wrong with him. He recalled the incident at the pool earlier that day when he tried to prevent Ashley from falling into the pool. But his legs had refused to listen to him, and he had been frozen to the spot. She had looked at him with such disappointment that he felt completely useless, yet he couldn't explain to her what had happened. And just a few moments ago, when they had swam over to the island, he had put both their lives in danger. If she hadn't pulled him out of the water, he would have sunk to the bottom of the sea. If the island were further away, we would have both drowned thanks to me, he thought. He shook his head, realizing he was just a shadow of his former self. He couldn't park outside her house and wait for her for hours, nor could he block the elevator, inquiring if she still had feelings for him. Tears welled up in his eyes when he thought about that. He stared at the churning seawater below and decided he would stop chasing her when they returned to New York. She deserved someone better than him. He vowed never to call her or show up at her door again. Peter would be good for her. Although Latham knew that Peter was addicted to video games and loved pranks, he also had a serious side. He would take good care of Ashley and would make her happy. Most importantly, he's healthy and doesn't limp when he walks, he thought bitterly. Ashley slept soundly next to him, her breath tickling his neck. He lifted his head and kissed her forehead as a symbolic gesture of farewell. She woke up an hour later and noticed it was already dark. Stars had appeared in the sky, and the islet they had been on had completely disappeared. Her heart skipped a beat when she suddenly realized she was lying on Latham's shoulder. She slowly raised her head and looked around, trying to seem casual. That was a great nap. I needed that. You slept like a baby, he said. I'm glad you're feeling better. Did you manage to get some rest as well? He shook his head. No, I wasn't sleepy. Besides, I was keeping an eye out for boats. I'm sure the others have returned to the main island by now and notified the hotel that we've gone missing. They'll send someone to look for us. You should also get some sleep. We can take turns. I feel okay now, so I can stay up. Thanks. Wake me if you see anything. He lay back down and closed his eyes. Ashley listened to the sound of waves crashing against the shore for a while, and then she gazed at Latham. His face was barely visible in the faint light, but she could tell it had regained its color. He still looked thin and haggard, though, which she assumed was because he hadn't completely recovered after his chronic appendicitis. She admired his long eyelashes and thick dark eyebrows and thought he looked like a Greek god with his prominent features and high cheekbones. She had felt so safe and secure lying on his shoulder just then. He was comfortable and warm. Why has he been trying so hard to ignore me? She wondered. A cool breeze swept over the small island. She shivered, hoping someone would come and rescue them soon. Though it was hot during the day, she knew it could become unbearably cold without the sun. She snuggled next to Latham, feeling the warmth of his body. She still had her swimsuit on, and it was chilly. A gust of wind suddenly blew some dust into her nose, and she sneezed repeatedly. Latham opened his eyes and looked at her. Are you cold, Ashley? Why don't you take your swimsuit off? She shook her head and wiped her nose with the back of her hand. Sorry I woke you. I'll be okay. I wish you had a towel or blanket to keep you warm. Look at you. You're shivering. Without thinking, he reached out and pulled her into his arms. She lay there, stunned. His embrace felt warm and soft. Latham, it's all right. I'm not that cold. but she didn't struggle or move away from him. He then wrapped his legs around hers. There. Isn't that much better? Ashley felt a wave of warmth wash over her, and she put her head on his chest. She was red with embarrassment, but she felt happy and content. They lay there in silence, enjoying the closeness. She could feel his heart pounding in his chest and knew he was just as nervous and excited as she was. Latham stared up at the moon and sighed. Ashley's body was soft and delicate. He didn't dare move for fear of ruining the moment. He realized he couldn't hide his injury from her much longer. It was too obvious that something was wrong. He had underestimated her effect on him and overestimated his ability to control the situation. Although it was cold and windy on the small island, he felt like he was burning up next to her. Every fiber of his being tingled with excitement. He was afraid if he continued hugging her like that, he wouldn't be able to stop himself from making a move. He pulled back ever so slightly. Are you warm enough now? Her breathing had quickened. Yes, I'm okay now. Thanks. Night had fallen, and apart from the bright stars in the sky, they were surrounded by darkness. Be sure to take a hot shower when we get back to the hotel, he said, trying to make conversation. It'll prevent you from getting sick. I will, if we ever make it back. I guess you'll need to take your medication, right? I think maybe the food here hasn't done you much good. I've noticed you've been under the weather. Just stay away from seafood. He nodded, not knowing what to say. They sat in awkward silence for several minutes. The tide had receded, and all was quiet except for the sounds of insects. It was strange to be there alone in the darkness, feeling one another's warmth as if they were the only two people on the entire planet. Ashley nudged Latham after a while. Are you awake? He yawned and put his head on her shoulder. Yes, but I'm exhausted. I thought you were asleep. Do you think Jonathan and the others will come and get us soon? She was secretly hoping they wouldn't. Yes, don't worry. When they see we're not back at the hotel, they'll send a search team. Suddenly, the wind started blowing again, scattering the clouds above them. Ashley pointed up at the sky. Look, do you see all those stars over there? Aren't they beautiful? Just shining in the darkness as far as the eye can see. Yes, some of them look so big. Is that the Milky Way? I'm not sure. It could be. I'm not familiar with the constellations. It's extraordinary. She tilted her head back. You usually don't see so many stars in the city. They're so far away, yet they seem so close that you could reach out and almost touch them. It reminds me of The Little Prince. It was one of my favorite books when I was growing up. I remember the story. Ashley stretched her hand out and pretended to pluck a star from the sky at the same moment he did, and their fingers touched. They both pulled back as if they had received an electric shock. Latham was grateful she couldn't see the embarrassed look on his face. Those ones over there seem to form some sort of shape, Ashley said, but I'm not very good at recognizing constellations either. Can you believe these stars have been around for hundreds of millions of years? The universe is endless. Who knows how many more are out there? It's all one big mystery, isn't it? I'm always amazed by how small and insignificant we are compared to the universe. Those stars are millions or even billions of light years away, he continued. I can't even fathom such distances. Can you imagine how bright the stars must be close up? I read somewhere that each star has a distinctive spectrum of color that can only be seen using a telescope. Astronomers can determine a star's actual brightness from the color. You were being modest earlier when you said you didn't know anything about stars. You're quite the astronomer, Ashley teased. Have you ever seen a shooting star? Yes, quite a few times. They're streaks of light that tiny pieces of space rock or dust produce when they enter the atmosphere at high speed. They fell silent again. Latham touched her arm and pointed to the sky. I think those ones are the brightest. One of them must be the North Star. Sometimes I get so sad thinking about the vast and eternal universe compared to the brevity of human life. There was a hint of sadness and hopelessness in her voice. Don't you? She turned to him, but instead of replying, he leaned over and kissed her tenderly. They remained that way for a long time, tasting the salt water on each other's lips. It was familiar and yet new and exciting. It was all Latham could do not to grab her and pull her to the ground. Finally, he thought, I've been waiting forever for this moment. Her lips were soft and tender. He breathed in the irresistible scent of her skin, which awakened all his dormant senses. He willed himself not to think about anything and just obey his instincts, which were telling him to take her in his arms and make love to her. His entire body was trembling. He knew that if they continued to kiss like that, they would end up taking their clothes off. His mind wandered back to his injury. How could we make this work? He wondered. I can't go on excursions with her. I can't even take her shopping. She'll be forced to do activities on her own. What will she say if she finds out I have a limp that could get worse with time? He imagined people laughing and pointing at them. The worst part was thinking about their future children. How will I play sports with them and teach them to play soccer? The other kids will make fun of them at school. I will never be like I was before. Would Ashley accept me the way I am now? He suddenly pulled away, afraid of going any further. He felt as if someone had opened up his chest and ripped his heart out. Ashley turned red with embarrassment, taking his action to mean he didn't want anything more from her. She cleared her throat and looked up at the sky again. I wonder if people millions of years from now will see what we're seeing now. Do you think the Milky Way is still going to be there? Maybe the Earth won't be here by then. Maybe all these islands will disappear as if they had never existed. Ashley fell silent as she contemplated what Latham had said. She let her thoughts wander. In a million years, it was possible that everything would become nothing more than dust. They were as insignificant as a drop of water in the ocean. Their love, hatred, trials, tribulations, and the importance they invested in the things they did would disappear. Latham felt strangely emotional from their conversation and couldn't shrug off the feeling. Ashley stared up at the stars again. Life is too short. This is my reality. Maybe I should seize this moment, she thought. She turned to Latham. He puzzled her. It was evident she couldn't let go of her feelings for him, yet he didn't seem to notice or reciprocate them. She took a deep breath. Latham, there's something that I need to ask you. She had decided it was time to find out if he had feelings for her. She would throw all caution to the wind if he did, and they could finally be together. All of the misunderstandings from the past would mean nothing. She wanted him to be part of her life, and she wanted to grow old with him. He looked at her and nodded. What is it? She mustered her courage. Although he had hurt her in the past, she was willing to try again. She didn't want to miss the moment and spend the rest of her life living with regret. I need to know if you... But her voice was drowned by a helicopter approaching in the distance. A searchlight glowed in the dark sky and swept across the little island where they lay. Latham sat up and laughed. They've found us. Ashley looked up and watched the helicopter fly past and circle back toward them. She stood up and waved her arms in the air. They've come to rescue us. Latham pushed himself up and struggled onto his feet. As the sound of the rotor slapping the air grew louder, he turned to Ashley. What did you want to ask me? She shook her head. Don't worry about it. We can talk about it later. The helicopter landed, and Jonathan slid the cabin door open. Ashley, Latham, are you okay? He reached out and pulled Ashley in first before helping Latham. With both of them safely aboard and strapped in, the pilot took off and sped across the night sky. The little island they had taken refuge on soon disappeared. Jonathan unzipped a small backpack and handed them each a bottle of water and a bar of chocolate. Here, take this. I'm so relieved you're both okay. Latham took a long sip of water. What happened? The boat driver had dropped us off on a small island and said he'd be back for us. We waited, but then the tide started to rise. I didn't take my phone, and Ashley's battery died. We had to swim to another island to escape the rising tide. Frowning, Jonathan began to explain. We thought you would come back to the main island. After we finished diving, we went to another island. We had caught some fish while diving, and we cooked it on the beach. We hung around until it started to get dark before returning to the main island. We only realized then that you two weren't there, and when I asked what had happened to you, the captain said he had taken you to a smaller island, but then he realized he had never picked you up again. Ashley was stunned. So when you arrived back at the main island and couldn't find us, you realized that the captain had forgotten about us? Jonathan nodded. Maria mentioned that you two were probably starving since you hadn't eaten at the hotel, and she said we should keep some of the fish we had cooked on the beach aside for you. That's when the captain remembered he had forgotten to pick you two up. He had become concerned because he said the high tide would have already submerged the small island. Latham didn't know what to say. The captain forgot us? Jonathan rubbed his forehead. At least you both know how to swim. He said a few islands wouldn't be submerged by the tides and hoped you would swim to one of them. The helicopter trip back to the main island didn't take long, and they soon reached the hotel. After landing, Latham helped Ashley out and stared at her damp clothing. Why don't you take a hot shower, change into some fresh clothing, and meet me for dinner? She smiled at him. Okay, I'll see you later. She felt her skin tingle slightly. She was sure he still cared for her. She decided she would ask her question when the next opportunity arose. Sydney and Norman had decided to stay at the hotel for a few more days and enjoy their honeymoon, while everyone else left to return to work. Latham was leaving that morning, but Jonathan and Nancy had decided to stay for one more day. They lay beside the hotel pool and soaked up the warm tropical sun. Jonathan was about to get up to take a dip in the pool when he heard a message notification beep on his phone. It was from Jack, regarding the information Latham had requested. Jonathan saw Latham in the hotel lobby, waiting for a taxi to take him to the airport. He hadn't told Ashley that he was leaving. Instead, he had left a message on the group chat that Nancy had set up to say he had to leave early to get back to work. He wasn't sure if it was because of the humidity or the swimming, but his leg had ached terribly during the night, and he had struggled to stand up when he had woken up that morning. At first, he had tried to ignore the pain, but it had soon become unbearable, and he limped to the lobby to check out. As he hobbled toward the taxi, he heard a familiar voice call out to him. It was Jonathan, and he had his phone in his hand. Jonathan quickly caught up with him and handed him the phone. Latham, wait. Before you leave, Jack gave me the information you requested. Although Latham looked calm, he secretly watched Jonathan's expression. He relaxed, once it seemed as if Jonathan hadn't noticed him limping. He took the phone and read the message. Thanks. I've got to get back to the office. Enjoy the rest of your stay. He handed the phone back to Jonathan. There were only a few steps between him and the taxi. He took a deep breath and forced himself to walk normally and open the door. Jonathan quickly grabbed the door handle. What's wrong with your leg? Latham's body went stiff with fright for a second before he smiled and replied. It's nothing. I sprained my ankle yesterday. He tried to laugh it off, but could tell Jonathan didn't buy his excuse. Jonathan glared at Latham and raised his eyebrows. Did you really sprain your ankle? Latham forced a smile. What's wrong? You look as though you don't believe me. Jonathan looked him up and down before patting him on the shoulder. Take care. Everything's going according to plan. Relieved, Latham nodded and got into the taxi. See you soon. Jonathan watched the taxi drive off and thought about what Latham had said. It didn't add up. He hadn't seen him limp like that the day before when he had rescued him and Ashley. Latham had climbed in and out of the elevator with relative ease. Jonathan doubted Latham had been honest with him and felt something was wrong. He wasn't easily fooled, and once he suspected someone of lying, He would do anything to find out the truth. Latham had been acting strangely for a while. He hadn't joined them at any social gatherings for a while, except for the double wedding. He was also usually the most lively of anyone in their group of friends. He had even offered to judge their swimming competition the day before instead of participating. Jonathan had been friends with Latham for over 20 years, and they knew each other very well. He knew that his friend was deliberately hiding something from him. He thought about how he had seen him limp toward the taxi and decided to call Jack. Check Latham's medical records from the last 2 months. Jack was slightly confused, but he could tell by the tone in Jonathan's voice that it was serious. Okay, I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Jonathan shook his head. It's urgent. I want to know before the day is over. He was sure Latham knew he doubted his excuse of a sprained ankle and was worried he'd try to cover his tracks as soon as he returned to New York. When he returned to the hotel, he found Nancy and Ashley sitting at the poolside bar, casually chatting and waiting for him. Nancy saw him and waved. We're over here. She handed him a large icy drink with a tiny umbrella and a straw. Taste this. It's a cocktail without alcohol. It's delicious. He took a sip and frowned as the ice gave him an instant headache. Didn't you say you can't handle cold drinks? Nancy pouted. I'm not that delicate. Besides, Helga is here. I'll tell her immediately if I feel any discomfort. Jonathan shrugged helplessly and playfully pinched her cheek before swallowing the rest of the drink in one gulp. He wasn't fond of icy cold drinks, but he drank Nancy's to prevent her from finishing it. Ashley looked at him and burst out laughing. You really spoil your wife. He looked at her and smiled. Yeah, I know. By the way, I just saw Latham leave. He said he had to get back to work. She nodded. Oh, I see. She stirred her drink with the straw and tried to hide her disappointment. He hadn't said anything to her, even when they had dinner together the previous evening. Suddenly, the sound of 2 excited voices interrupted her thoughts. Dorian ran past. His entire body was covered in sand. Rose followed closely behind him. He laughed as he ran and shouted, Why won't you tell me the truth? Although Rose was a good fighter, she wasn't as fast a runner as Dorian was. She sprinted past the poolside bar as she chased after him. Nancy laughed and looked at Jonathan. Rose is so different from your other family members. Jonathan smiled. Yeah, she is. He thought about Alexander and sighed. Nancy chuckled. They look like enemies now, but maybe they secretly like each other. She sat in silence for a few seconds before her eyes lit up. They both have great names. They'll make a good couple. Jonathan looked at her in astonishment. You seem to like so many names these days. She shrugged. Well, we'll soon have 3 babies to name. He patted her lightly on the arm. There's still time to decide. We don't have to rush. That evening, Jonathan received an email from Jack. Although he had already suspected what was wrong with Latham, he was still shocked to see the contents of the email. Jack had sent him a few reports and photographs of the incident outside Ashley's apartment. Latham had been badly injured while defending himself, and he had killed his attacker. The incident had happened more than a month ago, and the case had been closed. Latham had been taken to the hospital after the incident. Jonathan also read Latham's medical diagnosis report, which said that he had badly damaged a nerve in his foot. It was because of his injury that he had changed so much. After reading the reports, Jonathan put his phone away and turned to Nancy, who lay beside him with her feet on a pillow. Do you remember when we got the Jung family medicine recipes? We met someone who had recovered from a broken leg. Nancy thought about it for a while and shook her head. I don't recall, but I remember reading about something similar in my grandfather's notes. Someone had broken their leg, and they had used medicinal plants that my grandfather had discovered up in the mountains. Their leg had healed completely shortly afterward. Jonathan frowned slightly. Perhaps we can get our hands on some of those plants. Helga also said she wanted a recipe for infertility. We'll have to sort it out when we return to the city. Nancy nodded. Why do you want medicine for a broken leg? Did someone get hurt? It's Latham, but you have to keep it a secret. He has a damaged nerve in his ankle and struggles to walk because of it. Nancy looked at him in astonishment. It all makes sense now. I watched him at the wedding yesterday. He walked slowly as if he was in pain. He didn't even dance. I saw him hobble over to the chairs and sit down. He looked like I do when I'm on my period. Jonathan chuckled at Nancy's description. If he knew how you just described him, he'd never go out in public again. Sighing, Nancy wiggled her swollen toes. Then we'll have to find those plants for him. He's usually so cheerful. I miss his energy. No one else livens up a room quite the way he does. Jonathan grinned. You're forgetting about my niece. They returned to New York City the following day. After attending an important business meeting, Jonathan phoned Latham. I know about everything. Latham kept quiet, but he knew what Jonathan was talking about. He didn't know what to say. Jonathan was the first to break the silence. I spoke to a specialist about your condition, and he said it can take several years to fully recover. But I remembered that the Jung family once discovered medicinal plants that cured someone with a similar problem. The plants could help you too. Latham felt a sense of relief wash over him. Are you sure? Jonathan hesitated for a moment. The plants are rare, and we'll have to find them first. Helga can administer the treatment, and it should take about a year for you to recover. Latham felt like he had been handed a lifeline and could finally see past his pain. So all we need to do is find the plants. Yeah, I'll send you the details. See if any of your connections can help, and I'll try mine. For the first time in weeks, Latham felt a glimmer of hope. He immediately thought of contacting an old school friend, Leticia, who had specialized in homeopathy and botanical medicines. Her family was considered an authority in the field, as they had practiced homeopathy for several generations. He quickly found her phone number and called to ask her if she knew where to find the medicinal plants. Leticia sighed bitterly. I'm sorry, but those particular plants no longer exist. They disappeared a century ago already. Latham felt like someone had thrown a bucket of cold water over him. He kept quiet for a while as he regained his composure. Are you sure? What happened to them? She took a deep breath and began to explain. Yeah, I'm certain. I heard the story long ago when I was still a small child. The plants only used to grow in one place, and that was in the mountains close to my great-grandfather's town in the countryside. A wildfire swept through the mountains one year. It destroyed everything, including the rare plants. My great-grandfather was devastated. One day, a wealthy man visited and asked him for the plants. He even offered a large sum of cash, but my great-grandfather couldn't help him. Latham felt hopeless, and he fell back against his chair. A bitter smile crept across his face, and he blankly stared at the wall. He couldn't believe that there was no hope for him. Nancy phoned Jonathan, and she sounded serious. I asked Helga about the plants for Latham. She said the plants went extinct a very long time ago, and there isn't anything else to use. She said she could still try a few other treatments on him, but they won't be very effective without the plants. Jonathan took a deep breath. Are you sure? Yeah. She said there aren't any other plants like those anywhere else in the world. Unfortunately, no one else has developed a similar type of medicine. He looked out of the window and sighed. Okay, I understand. And the infertility treatment? I found a few recipes. I'll send them to Helga and ask her which one she wants. Jonathan hung up, feeling frustrated and slightly upset. He hadn't considered that there would be a problem obtaining the medicinal plants. He had even contacted Latham about the idea as soon as he heard about the treatment. He didn't know what he would say to Latham. He thought about it for a while before he phoned his friend again. The phone rang a few times before Latham finally answered. His voice sounded hoarse and tired.
Hi, Jonathan.
Jonathan cleared his throat. I'm so sorry. I didn't know that the plants have gone extinct. He had guessed by Latham's tone when he had answered the phone that he already knew. Latham forced himself to sound calm.
It's not your fault. Besides, the doctor said I'll eventually recover. It'll just take years.
Is that why you've been avoiding Ashley? Angry that Jonathan dared to be so straightforward, Latham was about to make up an excuse, but decided to answer truthfully instead.
Yeah.
Latham didn't need to say anything else. Jonathan immediately understood everything. Are you sure you won't regret it? Latham kept silent for a few seconds.
Yeah, I'm sure. She deserves to live her own life. Don't tell her about my condition.
Jonathan didn't reply, so Latham asked him again.
Please, don't tell her anything.
Sighing, Jonathan finally relented. Okay, I won't. They hung up and got back to their work. As Jonathan prepared to leave the office for the day, he saw an incoming message from Ashley. I'm free this weekend, so I'll come over and visit you and visit Nancy. On her way to see Nancy, Ashley drove past a shopping mall that advertised the opening of a new baby store. She knew that Nancy was expecting 2 boys and a girl, so she stopped to buy baby clothing as a gift. She browsed through the store and cooed over the cute sleep suits and other little outfits. She ended up buying 3 sets of each outfit she liked. After paying, she walked toward the elevator to go down to the first floor when she suddenly saw a familiar figure walk out. It was Latham. He was wearing a smart suit and looked as handsome as ever. His 2 assistants flanked him. They were also well dressed in suits and ties. As they left the elevator, they turned toward a store owned by Latham's company. She assumed that he was there for an inspection. Luckily, they hadn't seen her. She hid behind a rack of clothing as she watched them walk away. Suddenly, Latham stopped. Ashley looked at him, confused. Something didn't seem right. His assistants had also stopped. They said something to him, and then they continued to walk into the store without him. He stood motionless for a while. Ashley thought he had stopped to make a phone call, but he didn't move. She contemplated whether she should approach him and say hello, when he suddenly bent over and began to rub his leg. He massaged his calf and ankle for a minute before standing straight again. As she watched him walk toward the store, she noticed he had a slight limp and moved with great difficulty. Ashley watched Latham disappear into the store. She quietly followed behind him, careful not to be seen. The store was a high-end boutique with shiny glass doors and sparkling windows. Through the glass, she saw Latham seated on a velvet couch with his back toward her. He spoke to a small group of store staff. Latham's assistants walked around the store and inspected the product displays and items packed neatly on the shelves. Ashley felt the worry in her heart grow heavier as she watched him. She remembered how she had once accompanied him on a store inspection. He had taken a few members of the marketing team with him. She had just started working at his company, and the marketing director had thought it would be an excellent way for Ashley to familiarize herself with the company's business activities. So, she had tagged along. At that time, she had had a vague idea of who Latham was. During the inspection, she had watched how he had carefully checked every aspect of the store and how well he had treated the staff. He had been friendly and didn't have any airs about him. When she returned to the office later that day, she told some of her colleagues about her experience and what she had noticed about Latham. One of her colleagues had smiled. It's true. He's a great boss. It's nothing like they've shown on TV, where he just sits on the couch and everyone runs circles around him. Ashley continued to watch him until one of his assistants almost saw her, and she hurried away. She tried not to make a big deal of seeing him that morning. Nancy had recently started loving baking. Because Jonathan had told her to take it easy, she didn't work such long hours anymore and kept herself busy by baking. She was also constantly hungry and happily devoured all the delicious treats she made. Ashley loved to eat Nancy's baked goods and took a large bite of a chocolate chip cookie, before casually mentioning that she had seen Latham while shopping for baby clothes earlier that day. Jonathan sat in the living room and turned his head when he overheard her. She wiped the crumbs off her face. It just seems like there's something wrong with him. He's had many health problems lately and struggles to walk properly. Nancy stopped kneading the dough in her hands and looked at Ashley thoughtfully. Do you think it has to do with having his appendix removed? Ashley shrugged. I don't know. What do you think, Jonathan? Jonathan nodded. It's possible. Maybe he hasn't healed properly yet. They continued to chat, and Jonathan politely asked about Brock. Has he been working on any new projects lately? Ashley smiled dryly. He may as well live in the sky. He's always jetting around nowadays. I don't know when I last saw him. Jonathan looked surprised. And you've been living alone the whole time? Why don't you come and stay here with us? There's plenty of room. She shook her head. I'm fine. There was just that one drunk guy who used to scare me, but I haven't seen him around in ages. It's a safe neighborhood. Jonathan nodded. Okay, if you say so. Remember that you're always welcome here, and Nancy could do with the company. Okay, I hear you. Ashley smiled happily as she slid a baking tray into the oven. She suddenly thought of her time in Cuba. I hope your crazy Uncle Matthew is done bothering you. I don't understand why he kidnapped me, held me hostage for a while, and suddenly let me go again. It was quite bizarre. Jonathan cleared his throat. It's not what you think it is. She looked up, puzzled. What do you mean? He ignored her question and quickly changed the topic. How's it going with you and Peter? I heard his father was in town, and you all had dinner together. She took a deep breath. I took Peter and his dad out as a treat, that's all. We're not dating. Jonathan raised his eyebrows. Does Peter know that? Yeah, he knows. We're just friends. Jonathan looked at her earnestly. Okay, if you're sure there's nothing between you and Peter, I have something to tell you. Ashley suddenly felt her heart beat faster. She instinctively felt that he was about to tell her something important. What is it? He looked her straight in the eyes and spoke slowly. It has to do with Matthew kidnapping you, and then suddenly releasing you. He let you go because someone else took your place. It took me 2 months to rescue that person. Ashley's eyes widened when she realized who he was talking about, but she needed to be sure. Who was it? It was Latham. Ashley froze, and Jonathan continued. After his father passed away, he went to Cuba and convinced Matthew to let you go in exchange for him. She clasped the dish towel in her hands, and her knuckles turned white. It makes sense now. After Matthew released me and I came home, I didn't see Latham for a long time. When I did eventually see him, I was shocked at how much weight he had lost. He looked terrible. Jonathan sighed. Listen, Ashley, I'm only telling you this because you deserve to know the truth. Only you and Latham can decide what happens between you in the future. She smiled and nodded. I know that. She wished she could find Latham and ask him about it. She desperately wanted to know why he had allowed himself to be taken hostage and had never said anything about it to her. She might have forgiven him if she had known. Her heart wasn't made of stone. He didn't know that she had seen him in the hospital when he had been so sick, and that she had secretly given up on him because she had been so disappointed by everything that had happened between them. After the wedding, when they had been stranded on the island together, she had been sure he still had feelings for her. She thought about all the unanswered questions she had been carrying in her heart and felt like she could burst. Nancy looked at Ashley's face, fraught with emotion. If you want to sort this out, for once and for all, then go and speak to him. Not now. He's too busy. I know what it's like after a store inspection. I'll go see him in a few days. 2 days later, Ashley sent Latham a text. Hi, are you free this evening? I need to ask you something. We can have dinner somewhere. My treat. Latham replied almost immediately. Sure, sounds good. Send me the restaurant's name. Ashley spent the rest of the day in a daze. She thought about Cuba and wondered if he had been treated differently than her as a hostage. She stayed in decent accommodation and had eaten proper meals. Matthew had often sent Jonathan videos of her, but no one had heard anything from Latham during the 2 months he had been held captive. He had returned haggard and thin, as if he had been kept in squalid conditions. She also wondered why he hadn't told her anything when they had finally seen each other again. Ashley tried her best to stay calm and focused on her work. She patiently waited until her working day ended before she rushed to the restaurant. She had told Latham she would meet him at 7 o'clock that evening, and she arrived 10 minutes early. She sat at the bar and waited for him. By 7:30, he still wasn't there. She moved to the table she had reserved and decided to phone him. The phone rang a few times, and she was about to hang up when he finally answered. "Hi, Ashley. Are you still coming? I'm sitting next to the window. Shall I order something so long?" Latham's voice sounded muffled. "I'm 10 minutes away. I was dropping someone off quickly. Order what you feel like. I don't mind." She was about to respond when she heard a woman talking in the background. She sounded young and playful. "I'm also hungry." Stunned, Ashley looked around momentarily, expecting that she had heard a woman in the restaurant, but it was clear it was someone with Latham. She heard the woman giggle and Latham's attempt to keep her quiet. "Stop messing around. I'm on the phone." Ashley held her breath. She was sure Latham had a woman in his car with him. He was also probably connected to the car's hand-free kit, so she was sure her conversation with him had been overheard by the woman. She then heard the car stop and the sound of the door opening. "Okay, Latham, I'll wait for you." But before she could finish her sentence, she heard the woman's flirtatious voice. "You'd better kiss me, or I'll be very jealous." Ashley's body stiffened, and she felt a lump in her throat. Latham realized that Ashley had overheard everything. "I'm dropping off my friend's sister." Then he quickly hung up. She listened to the beeping sound and kept the phone to her ear for a few seconds before putting it on the table. She felt numb. She looked out the window and watched the city lights blur in the night sky. "Am I a joke to him?" she thought bitterly. She wanted to believe that he still had feelings for her, but the more she thought about his recent indifferent attitude, the more she realized she was fooling herself. When Jonathan had told her about how Latham had traded places with her as Matthew's hostage, she had been sure that he still cared for her, and she had allowed herself to feel all the emotions she had once buried. But it was merely a repetition of what had happened before. He had misled her, and she had misread him. She wondered if the woman in the car was another one of his many girlfriends. She thought that perhaps she had been nursing him back to health. It suddenly made sense that he had pulled away from their kiss that day when they had been stranded on the island. Ashley felt an indiscernible feeling of sadness and shame. All she wanted to do was get up and walk out, but she didn't. She still had her dignity, and even if Latham broke her heart every time, she refused to let him see how much he hurt her. He knew exactly why she had left, and he would laugh at her. She took a small mirror from her purse and refreshed her lipstick and makeup. She then gestured for the waiter and placed her order. Latham arrived soon after. He looked slightly disheveled, with his shirt collar undone and his hair in a mess. He also had a suspicious red mark on his cheek. He pulled the chair out and sat down with a large smile on his face. "I'm so sorry I'm late. I had to take a friend home, and the traffic was awful." Ashley smiled politely. "Don't worry about it. I've already ordered. Here's the menu. Maybe there's something you'd like to order." Latham looked through the menu and ordered a few extra side dishes. He sipped his wine. "What's the special occasion? What did you want to ask me?" She listened to how he spoke to her like she was nothing more than a friend, and she wondered how she could have misunderstood him for so long. Irritated, she flipped through the menu to calm herself down. "I wanted to ask you something about your company. Brock is busy with a project that may interest you." She had quickly thought up a different question to ask him at the last minute. He didn't seem to notice, and he answered her in a businesslike manner. Their conversation flowed naturally, as if they had always just been friends and business associates. The waiter served their meals, and Latham raised his glass to make a toast. "Jonathan told me that you've been promoted to assistant manager. Congratulations." Ashley tapped her glass against his. "Thank you." Suddenly, his phone pinged with a message notification. Ashley looked down and saw the name Mavis on the screen. She wondered if it was the woman who had been in the car earlier. She didn't recall ever meeting someone who worked at his company called Mavis. Latham unlocked his phone and read the message. "Hi, I wanted to ask you about what you thought about my acting today." He smiled and replied, "It was amazing. Thanks so much." "You'll have to repay me." Latham chuckled softly. "And how do you propose I do that?" "I want the limited edition phone when you launch your new range next week." He smiled again. "Of course." "Thank you. But be honest with me. Do you regret what you did?" He looked at the message but didn't reply. Instead, he slid his phone into his jacket pocket. Ashley had been watching him the whole time. He suddenly seemed happier, as if texting the woman had lifted his spirits. She sighed and thought he had finally found someone he liked. She decided the best she could do was to let him be and give him her blessing. They finished their meal, and Latham called his driver to take him home. Ashley walked out of the restaurant with him and was going to wait until his driver arrived, but she couldn't get the woman's voice out of her head. She greeted him goodnight and went to her car. As she was about to drive away, she suddenly remembered that Brock had asked her to buy him medicine on her way home. She saw a pharmacy next to the restaurant and made a U-turn to find parking. But as she turned around, she saw Latham cross the road toward his driver, who had been waiting for him at the intersection. She watched in astonishment as he slowly crossed the road one step at a time, as if he could barely walk. Steve stared at the small sachet in his hand. Though he knew nothing about embroidery, he could tell the intricate, detailed pattern had taken a lot of time and effort to stitch. He had watched a lot of old romance films with his gran, and in the films, it had been common practice for young women to make sachets for their suitors. The sachet had a colorful pattern of exotic flowers on the front, and his initials, SD, had been stitched onto the back. It had a pleasant fragrance of herbs and flowers. He stared at his initials and wondered if the sachet was a symbol of Helga's affection for him. He shrugged, put it in his pocket, and picked up the bucket of clean potatoes. The more he thought about Helga's awkward behavior ever since she had moved into his grandmother's house, the more convinced he was that she had a crush on him. He decided that her nonchalant and aloof attitude toward him was merely a front. He knew plenty of women who played hard to get, and she was clearly no exception. He walked back to the house and took the potatoes to Helga, who Helga was busy stir-frying the other vegetables she had picked in a pan in the kitchen. He pointed to the bucket. "What should I do with the potatoes?" "Cut them into long pieces," she replied without looking up. He raised his eyebrows but said nothing. He found a chopping board and began to cut the potatoes into uneven pieces. He had no culinary skills, and it was the first time anyone asked him to help with the cooking. He turned to Helga after a while. "Aren't we having any meat with the vegetables?" She shook her head. "No, it's getting late. I wanted to make something simple for dinner. We can go hunting in the forest tomorrow if you want." "Okay. I finished cutting the potatoes. I'll leave the rest to you." He walked out of the kitchen, not knowing what else to do. They sat down at the table a short time later. Helga had made stir-fried vegetables and rice. Steve put some food on Carol's plate, and then he served himself. He made a face as he looked at the vegetables in front of him. What's dinner without meat? He wondered. He had grown up in the city and was used to eating lavish steaks and pork roasts. He hated the idea of having plain rice and vegetables every evening and regretted going on the trip more than ever. He put a piece of potato in his mouth and chewed it carefully. Surprised by how delicious it tasted, Carol was also very impressed with how the meal had turned out. "Helga, this is absolutely amazing. I haven't had anything this good in years. How did you turn something so simple into such an exquisite meal? Helga smiled. The vegetables are fresh and straight from the garden. They have no pesticides or any other chemicals. Carol polished off everything on her plate. Steve had never seen her with such a hearty appetite. He was equally hungry after climbing the mountain that morning, and he helped himself to 2 servings of vegetables and half of the potatoes he had washed, peeled, and cut. He then finished the food Helga had left on her plate. Carol sat back and smiled happily. Helga, it looks like Steve approves of your culinary skills. Good. There are plenty of vegetables in the garden. I can get some more tomorrow. Steve was reluctant to admit that she was a good cook. I was hungry. I'm more of a meat eater, to tell you the truth. He took the plates to the kitchen and washed them. Neil and Norbert, the 2 guards that Steve had sent to town, returned later with various items they had bought and put them away. It was only 8 o'clock in the evening, but it was already dark outside. Carol and Helga chatted for a while on the terrace, which had been fitted with mosquito screens, and enjoyed the gentle breeze and the fragrant scent of the forest. Carol excused herself an hour later and went to bed. Steve wasn't tired at all, but returned to his room since there was nothing else to do. He was about to take out his phone and check his apps, when he suddenly remembered that the house had no electricity or network coverage. Isn't this grand? He thought angrily. I'm stuck in this hut and can't even use my phone. The night stretched endlessly ahead of him. He couldn't sleep and stared out the window at the full moon. He reached into his pants pocket for something and suddenly felt a small familiar shape of the embroidered sachet Helga had left by the stream earlier. He pulled it out and broke into a smile. He then got up and walked across the small living room to her room. She was in the middle of her evening meditation when she heard a light knock on the door. She got up and opened it. Steve stood there with a strange expression on his face. The moonlight cast shadows on his silhouette and perfectly chiseled face. He handed her the sachet. I found this by the stream when I was washing the potatoes earlier today. I thought you might have dropped it there by accident. There was a hint of mockery in his voice. She looked at the sachet and frowned, wondering why he was returning it. Okay, thanks, Steve. He nodded and waited for her to say something more. Is there anything else? She asked. He pointed to the sachet. Care to explain what's that for and why you left it there for me? Helga looked at Steve in bewilderment. Explain what? He pointed to the sachet again. She shrugged. I made it last month. It's no big deal. I like embroidery. I can make one for you if you want me to. What a lame excuse. Why can't she just admit she likes me and had made it especially for me? He wondered. He decided he didn't want anything to do with her. She was odd and untrustworthy. She had managed to fool everyone else in the family, but she couldn't fool him. It occurred to him that maybe she had only given him the sachet to get on his good side, and he had no interest in pursuing a romance with someone who was so manipulative. I don't need your gifts, Helga, he said coldly. She shrugged. Suit yourself. I think you're reading too much into it. Steve's hostile attitude was a mystery to her. Maybe he hates the mountain life, she thought. Still, he was nice enough to accompany his grandmother here. I guess that's worth something. When he realized she wasn't the least bit troubled by his behavior, he became even more annoyed. I want you to know that I'm not interested in you. I'm seeing someone else. Not waiting for her reply, he turned around and left. She watched his moonlit figure retreat, and then she closed the door. The next morning, Steve woke up at dawn. His window was facing east, so the sun shone directly onto his head. He yawned and looked at the time. It was only 6 in the morning. He wasn't used to waking up so early, but he got out of bed, brushed his teeth, and washed his face. He then went for a brisk jog in the forest. When he returned, Helga had already finished her morning exercises and was making breakfast for them. The porridge, which was made from grain from the village, had been mixed with fresh goat's milk, was exceptionally tasty. Steve sat across from her at the table, trying to gauge whether the previous night's conversation had affected her. But Helga didn't show the slightest disappointment or sorrow at his rejection. He quickly ate the porridge and took his bowl to the kitchen. "Helga, you mentioned something about hunting yesterday," he said. "Are we going to have meat for dinner tonight?" She nodded. "There are plenty of wild animals in the forest. We can go hunting later. I know some good spots." He laughed to himself. She's quite persistent, he thought. It's just another excuse to spend time with me. However, he was desperate to eat meat and didn't refuse her offer. They left after breakfast and returned later that afternoon with several pheasants and a wild rabbit. Helga made a delicious pheasant casserole and rabbit stew for dinner. Steve ate heartily and was in a much better mood afterward. He slept well that night and discovered after a few days that he was getting used to the mountain life. He went exploring with Helga, who was familiar with the entire area, and she took him to hidden spots while Carol stayed in the house with Neil and Norbert. On the fourth day, Helga told Steve and Carol to have lunch without her. Jonathan had given her a Jung recipe to treat infertility, and she needed to gather rare herbs in the forest for the medication. She took a big wicker basket and a straw hat and headed off. Steve went hunting on his own. Brock had been extremely busy with work ever since he had returned from Aruba, and his father had been putting pressure on him to set a wedding date with Lindsay. He kept finding excuses to put it off, claiming he needed to focus all his efforts on the company. One morning, he decided to take a day off and surprise Hannah in Pittsburgh. He stomped off to buy a dozen red roses before showing up at her place. He knocked on her door, but there was no answer. He was about to call her when a little girl ran out of the apartment next door. She stared at him with wide eyes. "Are you looking for the lady who lives there?" Brock smiled and nodded. "She went out with her boyfriend." He frowned. "When did they leave?" The little girl thought for a moment, and then she spread her arms out. "They left that long ago." "Okay, thanks," Brock said grimly. Hannah and Ezra were at a coffee shop downtown, sitting in awkward silence. Finally, Ezra cleared his throat. "Have you decided what you want to do?" She nodded. "Yes. I don't think I can perform with the band anymore. I'm sorry. I'm sure you guys will do great without me. I promise to follow all your concerts." "Are you sure? We're going to make it big, you know. It's the chance of a lifetime. You don't need to worry about our relationship. You know I'm professional. Besides, my contract stipulates that I'm not to get involved with any band members for 3 years. My manager thinks it'll be bad for my image if I get into a serious relationship now." 3 years? Hannah thought. He's still young. He has plenty of time to settle down and get married. He hoped that after 3 years, he and Hannah could be together. There had always been a subtle connection between the two of them. She raised her eyes and looked at him. "It has nothing to do with you or your contract. It's me. I'm not sure if I'm fit for the music industry. I hate traveling and being on stage all the time, and I can't stand all the crazy fans." She hadn't performed with them since the incident in front of her parents' building when she had been attacked by some crazy fans, and Brock had been stabbed. She wasn't the lead singer and didn't care that she had lost almost all her followers. She had decided that her freedom and her privacy were more important, and she didn't want to get caught up in all the drama of being a celebrity. "Brock saved me last time, but what about next time?" she wondered. She had made up her mind and was in no mood to argue with Ezra, who sat back in his chair and stared at her without saying a word. Hannah drank her coffee and was about to leave when Ezra reached across the table and grabbed her hand. She pulled it away quickly and sat back down, stunned. His eyes were filled with tears. "So that's it? You're just going to cut me out of your life?" They sat in silence for several minutes. Ezra finally laughed bitterly. I thought you felt the same way about me. It's complicated. You don't know about my past. I don't care about your past, he declared angrily. Heads turned to look at them, but he didn't seem to notice. Hannah remained calm. I was married before. He was taken off guard for a moment, but then collected himself. So what? You're divorced, aren't you? She took a moment to think about how to respond. I am, but I'm in love with someone else. He was speechless. I didn't tell you earlier because I didn't think it mattered. I'm sorry if I led you on. It's my fault. He sipped his coffee, not knowing how to respond. She could tell he was deeply hurt. Just then, her phone rang. It was her next-door neighbor, who had become her good friend. Some guy is standing outside your door looking for you, the woman said. He has a bouquet of roses. What does he look like? He's very good-looking. Tall, dark hair, well-built. Do you know him? You never know these days. It's best to be careful. Hannah sighed. Thanks. Yes, I know who it is. Just tell him I'm with my boyfriend and we'll be back soon. Got it, her neighbor said, and then hung up. Hannah put away her phone and glanced at Ezra, who had been listening intently to the conversation. He met her gaze. So I'm your boyfriend all of a sudden. What the heck is going on, Hannah? Who are you trying to avoid? Never mind. It's not important. Can we still be friends? He shrugged. Maybe. She looked deep into his eyes. I want you to know that I'm not rejecting you. Your friendship means a great deal to me, but I'm not ready for a relationship. It's just bad timing. She thought for a minute. I was wondering if I could ask you for a favor. Can you come back with me to my apartment and pretend to be my boyfriend so I can get rid of someone? Who? My ex-husband. He was annoyed. So you reject me, but you want me to help you get rid of your ex-husband? What kind of game are you playing, Hannah? She knew he hated being dishonest, unlike Brock, who was shrewd and manipulative. I'm not playing games. I want him to leave me alone and I need your help. Please don't get your hopes up, though. It doesn't mean I want to go out with you. He forced a smile. I'll do it only because you asked me nicely. They paid the bill and went to her apartment building. Brock was still standing outside her door with a bouquet of flowers in his hand. Hannah's heart skipped a beat when she saw him wearing his nicest suit, looking like he had just come out of an important business meeting. She suddenly recalled the night they had slept together in Aruba, and she took a deep breath. Ezra was ready to play his part. He grabbed her hand and smiled at her, pretending not to see Brock. She smiled back awkwardly and thought how strange it was to be holding his hand. Brock turned around when he heard them. His blank expression suddenly became angry. The two slowly approached him. Brock narrowed his eyes and looked daggers at Ezra. Hannah pretended to be surprised to see him. Do you know this guy, Han? Ezra asked casually. When Brock heard him call her by the nickname he had given her, he was ready to kill him. If she weren't here, I'd strangle him with my bare hands, he thought. Hannah looked at him with a strange expression and shook her head. I have no idea who this is. Brock was stunned. You don't know me? He grabbed her arm. What's the meaning of this, Hannah? Why are you pretending we're strangers? She broke out into a cold sweat, wondering what to say or do next. She had decided to cut off all ties with him after she found out she couldn't conceive. But she never imagined it would be so difficult, especially after what had happened in Aruba. She had fled back to Pittsburgh after the wedding and hadn't contacted him since. Her magazine editor had found her a long-term project there, and she had rented an apartment in the city. He had also put her in touch with a fertility specialist there, and she had gone to the clinic full of hope. But the specialist had only confirmed what Helga and the gynecologist in New York had already told her. She would never be able to have a child after her miscarriage. Devastated by the news, she had vowed to never have a relationship with anyone ever again.